So I show 9 o'clock, so I'm going to get started. And welcome to, actually it's our second webinar on cybersecurity maturity model certification. I'll just start out right away with some kind of late breaking news here is that yesterday the Federal Register showed the new final interim rule for the CMMC framework. And it's basically from today over the next 60 days, it's in a public comment period. And once that time frame is up, it's going to go live. Good news is that doesn't mean it immediately applies to you. It's going to apply over the next 5 years, but it is here and the clock's ticking. So, so you're at the right place to learn a bit more about this. So your speakers today are myself and Matt Frost, and we're both at CyberNINES. And I come at this from about 30 years in the military and then a number of years at a large medical device company, Medtronic, in different roles, quality, IT, division CIO, and then at last 10 years with Power Systems in Minneapolis, where I was the CIO for industrial automation company. In that role, I also had export compliance, and I've been working on this NIST regulation since it came out. Matt, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Good morning, everyone. My name is Matt Frost. I took a look at the attendee list. It looks like I've met quite a few of you. So I come from the Air Force, and I was with their cyber operations team for quite a few years, and then I went over to the civilian contracting side. And prior to coming to Madison, I was over at the Regional Cyber Center in Camp Arif Jan, Kuwait, which was kind of the hub of the whole Middle East out there. And my background is in cyber operations. I was trained in the NIST framework, and I kind of function as one of our lead auditor. And so it's a pleasure to be here and talk to all of you again. And I'm going to kick it back to Scott.
Sounds good. So just a little bit of where we've come from here and why really the DoD is coming out with came out with the requirement for NIST 800-171 and why they're even moving towards the new framework CMMC. But, you know, we've been being attacked for a long time. And in my last company in 2013, we were attacked by the Chinese in APT-1. We had a number of drawings and items for the US Navy, unclassified systems. And that's something that the Chinese decided that they wanted. And so basically I would say, actually, and the funny story is, the true story is I was sitting out on a golf course and got a call from my boss, CEO, saying mail wasn't working. And when we figured out that what was causing the problem with mail not working, it was basically because the link was being saturated by data flowing out. And so it just stopped mail. So we figured out what was happening when I did a reverse lookup on the location. It was an IP address in Shanghai. And so we had to go through the whole process of figuring out how to remediate and kick them out of our network. And it was quite the undertaking. And then on the flip side of that, in 2016, we had a situation, a social engineering attack, where our bank in the UK had been hacked, and they had pretty much almost all the information they needed to do a wire, except a couple items. And so they called our office and started talking with the person in the office, the accounting person, convinced them it was the bank actually calling them. And she gave the appropriate information that allowed the attacker to do a wire transfer. And so they started that transfer. Luckily, we were able to stop it before all the money was lost, but we did lose some of the money. And I know Matt's got an interesting ransomware attack story too.
Do you want me to go ahead and tell that now?
Yeah, go ahead. And then also maybe just walk through a little bit, you know, the whole escalation and lateral movement and how that works.
Sure. So my story, there's a company in the Madison area. This was my first year with CyberNINES before we moved into CyberNINES. It is a perishable goods company, and they do about $30 million in annual revenue, just to give you an idea of the size. They went home Friday evening after work, and when they got back into the office Monday morning, all of the computers were locked out and displaying splash screens saying you had to pay a certain amount of money if you wanted to use your computer. This was across the entire network. You know, we responded. We were on site within an hour, and we had determined that the attack had actually launched Friday evening after close, and had begun encrypting computers and servers over the weekend while no one was in the office. They were very lucky in that we had a concurrent project running, and because of that concurrent project, we actually took a full state backup about a week before, but they didn't have any real solid backup and restoral processes. They hadn't practiced any of that, and so if it wasn't for that, I'm not quite sure how much data they would have been unable to recover, but we were able to restore them and get them up and running for the day. They lost about a week worth of sales orders and shipping information and inventory, and then of course the time and materials and all the work hours for a Monday. But this kind of demonstrates how an attack can look based on how attackers and bad actors operate on the network. Once they get into your network, and this is most commonly through phishing attacks, bad links, or emails that direct you to web pages that you input passwords and credentials into. Once they establish a foothold in your network, they tend to do recon. They don't act right away. They tend to try and spend time getting to know your business. They want to know which players handle money. They want to know the pattern of which that money, those transactions are made. They do Google. They research things like your customers and your business hours, your location. They look up your social media accounts to try and see when they're going to have an opening to launch an actual attack. And while this recon's going on, they're beginning to do escalation. They're trying to grab access in the network that's privileged. So if they're a common user on the network, or they've established a presence with a common user on the network, they begin to try to grab administrative privileges. And from there, they move laterally into sensitive areas of the network that have the information they want, or where they can really lock down and spread quickly. And then when the moment comes, they go ahead and launch their attack. In this case, with this company, they waited until Friday because they know they didn't have a night shift and they know they weren't running over the weekend. So that gave them 3 days to do the encryption and launch the malware and the ransomware in order to lock everything down and be most effective when they came in Monday. This pattern of attack is actually pretty common. The day of the lone man in the basement who's angry at everybody, those days are over. What's been replacing that is a complicated network of cyber criminals who have an actual attack platform to use, and they have a methodology that's both complex and very, very pervasive.
Thanks, Matt. So just a little bit quickly about us. As Matt mentioned, CyberNINES was created as a spinoff of Five9s, and our focus is on addressing complexity related to NIST 800-171 compliance. That's our real focus. We also work with other frameworks and methodologies, HIPAA, some PCI, and so anyway. Five9s has been in business for over 20 years and is a full service technology company that a lot of people in the Wisconsin area are going to be familiar with. So CyberNINES is now the preferred cybersecurity partner for Five9's clients. And CyberNINES has registered to be a CMMC registered provider organization and a certified third-party assessor organization. And what that means is the RPO are companies that are accredited, been background checked to do support and help companies become prepared to be a CMM, to go through the assessment and to give advice, basically. And the certified third-party assessor organization, those are the organizations that are going to actually do the third-party audits when CMMC goes into effect in 60 days now, as we know. So right now, the two main clauses that companies need to meet are FAR 52-204-21, and that covers FCI, which is federal contracting information. And quite honestly, if you're not doing this basic 15 level of controls, then at some point you're going to get hit with ransomware or something. It's just the basics for good cybersecurity hygiene. DFAR 7012, that encompasses FAR 52 and is 110 controls and is the basis today of DoD contracting and managing CUI information, government contracting information. DoD contracts come with DFARs and they provide uniform acquisition policies. And they're written into contracts. I've got a couple examples that I'll just show of how things get flowed down. The prime will get the requirement from the DoD for DFAR 7012, and the primes are required to flow that down to their subcontractors through purchase orders and or contracts. Okay. So CUI is information the government creates or possesses, or that an entity creates or possesses for on behalf of the government. So, and it basically, if you think, you probably have heard of ITAR maybe, or EAR. ITAR is defense technical data or systems. EAR is dual use, so it could be used, I always like to say it can be used for good or evil, but it's items, for example, switches that are used that can be used in improvised explosive devices. For example, there was a case, Minnesota company that actually was, they had gotten a request for a lot of these switches and they didn't do their due diligence background to find out where those switches were going or what they were being used for. And they were ending up in IEDs. So, all of this is critical, not just from the protecting, control, and classified information, but export control is critical too. So what does the DFAR today look like, 7012? This is an excerpt from the DFAR. This is not the whole DFAR, but what I just kind of wanted to show with this is where the NIST 800-171 gets pulled into the requirement that you have to meet it through the flow down. So, and as we know, this is going to be changing in the next 60 days. But the main point is that contractors have to protect this government CUI information, and you have to provide adequate security. And the way that they're implementing that adequate security is through NIST 800-171. So back to the False Claims Act. So it's all about knowingly submitting false information to the government. They can get 3 times the damage of the contract plus 11,000 per claim. So it can get very expensive very quickly. DOJ collected $3 billion in settlements in 2019. I know that this is getting ramped up. They're spending more effort at bringing settlements And whistleblowers, here's the thing too, you think about, some disgruntled inside worker, they can bring a whistleblower claim and collect part of the money that in the damages. So it's something to be aware of. If you think about like an FMEA or the kind of the risk, the chance of getting audited by the government is fairly low. However, it can put you out of business, let's put it that way, if you get hit with the False Claims Act. So Matt, I'm going to turn it over to you to talk about basically to move us into NIST 800-171 more specifics.
Of course, of course. So today, where we're at is in order to do business with the United States government as a contractor, you need to meet the DFAR 7012. And this requires two pieces of documentation, and these two pieces of documentation are what you need to meet that DFAR. One is a system security plan. This is a comprehensive document that lays out how you're addressing cybersecurity regarding the 800-171 controls. This is a piece of paper that says this is what we are attempting to do. This is what we're doing right now. The other is a POAM, a Plan of Actions and Milestones. This is a document that describes what you will be doing, what your goals are regarding your security controls and your program. And this lays out a timeline of improvements you're making to your position on certain areas of your plan. The CMMC, as we move from the 800-171 to the maturity model certification, it's going to require a third-party audit and certification. The 800-171 does not. You need to self-attest, and you need the two documents. That's going to change your CMMC. A lot of that CMMC model is built on the backbone of 800-171. And the scope of this, and I'm gonna hit this again a little bit later, the scope of this only applies to areas of the network that handle FCI or CUI. And the certificate will be valid once you're certified for 3 years. So NIST 800-171 currently is structured under 14 control families and 110 individual controls spread out through those 14 families. A large section of this, 39, can be met strictly by the policy and procedure documents that we mentioned. And again, you self-attest to compliance with the DFARS clause. Right now, this is required if you do work with the DoD as a contractor. The GSA, NASA, and New York State education law require that you meet 800-171. And as Scott mentioned, it's enforced through the False Claims Act. So the journey towards meeting this, and part of our process here too, is you start with the DFARS that comes down with your purchase order. And you conduct an internal review, and then you do an assessment of some kind regarding your processes to look at how you're addressing CUI. You develop your SSP, your System Security Plan, and your POAM around the NIST 110 controls in the 14 families. And then you begin your remediation and projects found and documented in your POAM. And then you update your POAM, and and this part in particular forms a wheel that never really stops. And that's kind of the process now. All right, and the new process as it starts to roll out will be the CMMC. Now, the CMMC expands, and they change some dialogue here. So instead of cybersecurity families, and 14 of them, there are going to be 17 capability domains, but they're essentially the same thing. These are areas, they're headlines. They have added from 110 controls to 171, and they're now calling them practices instead of controls. And there's 5 levels to a CMMC certification. It's important to note that level 1 is required if you're going to have any FCI that you're protecting. Level 3 is required if you have any CUI. And then 4 and 5, most companies that do 4 and 5 are going to be the big prime contractors. In some form or another, most companies are going to come in at a level 3.
Matt, maybe I'll talk quickly about this slide for you.
Sure.
So Tuesday, as I kind of talked about earlier, the DoD released this interim rule that goes into effect on 11/30/20. So over the next 60 days, I guess it's more like 59 now, there is the ability for the public to comment on the rule. And that doesn't give a lot of time to actually make changes to the rule. So, you know, this is my editorial, is that I don't believe they are going to make a lot of changes unless somebody comes up with something really that's an issue for them. You can find the rule at this website that I have on the presentation, and folks can get access to this presentation after we're done through our website too. There's a number of new DFARS. It's more than just 7021. There's a 7019, 7020, and 7021 that make up the new kind of suite of regulations. I'm digesting it. Like I said, it came out Tuesday in the Federal Register, and it's 89 pages long. So I stayed up a little bit late last night, but not late enough to get through all 89 pages. But it does say that this is going to be phased in over the next 5 years. All contracts will be required to have this rule included in 2025. But as over the next 5 years, what's going to happen is it's going to be contract by contract, and each one has to be approved to add the new CMMC requirement into that contract. So that, and the reason is that they don't want to overburden the industrial base immediately, and they need to walk, then run, kind of learn how to do this over time. The rules are not retroactive, so if you have a signed contract, they can't go back in and put the rule in. However, if you're up for renewal on a contract and it's falls in, you know, and it's after 2025, it'll definitely have the new CMMC DFARS written into it. I'm gonna skip this. Matt, why don't you go ahead and finish us out here? Sure.
So the CMMC is really built on 800-171 and 800-53. And this includes additional controls from some of the other industries that are tied around government contracting. But really a lot of it is built on that a core NIST cybersecurity risk management framework. And the additional controls and practices that are built on top of the NIST controls all follow in the same line of thinking. And really what they're trying to do with this, and the easiest way to sum this up is, what are you doing? What are you protecting? And what would be a better practice? And you just continue those 3 questions as you go through. And whether you're doing an internal assessment or you're having a third-party assessment done, which again is going to be mandatory for the CMMC, that's really the mindset that you need to entertain as you begin to go through this process. What am I protecting? What am I doing to protect that information? And what could I be doing better? And we just continue this as we go right through. And that's really how you begin to make practical changes and to really begin to meet this effectively. So there's a bunch of extra controls here, and Scott will speak to some. There is one I do like to highlight, and that's employee security assessment of enterprise software that is developed internally for internal use. This does not mean you need to build your own software. what it means is that you have to essentially find something, whether it's through a third party or internally, and look at your areas of risk and begin to manage those areas of risk and assess them appropriately. Go ahead, Scott, sorry.
Oh, no, that's fine. I was going to say, I don't know that I don't want to walk through each of these in any way, shape, or form at this point, but it gives you an idea of what they've added to the NIST framework above and beyond what it is. But again, you go through these, and there's a lot of different ways that companies can meet these different practices and today controls. And it's supposed to be a risk-based approach to this. So if you're a small business and you are not doing anything but, let's say, build to print, then you build your system security plan around the activities that you're doing. And so you can create that, we call it a CUI enclave, and you basically control the flow of controlled unclassified information within that enclave. And keep in mind that, here we're talking about things in a kind of a digital world here, but you also print out CUI, and that needs to be managed and controlled too. So there's a whole section, on physical security as part of the framework too. So that, if you're printing out that document and it's an ITAR document and you have foreign visitors, well, you have to protect that document from that foreign visitor seeing that piece of paper on a desk somewhere. So you can kind of get a feeling for the pieces of that part of the puzzle you have to meet too. So to close out, before we take some questions here, what we offer, CyberNINES, is the ability, and by the way, my recommendation is that, as a small business, that you do look for some help or consultants, some experts on this. We're one source, but there are many out there doing this right now. And some of the things that I think we bring to the table is that we do look at this holistically, from the digital footprint down to the physical footprint. And both Matt and I have a background in these different areas that where we can help. So I will kind of close it there and open it up for some questions if I can figure out how to do this. All right, this is your chance out there. Anybody have some specific questions that we might be able to answer? So the first question I have is, do you see this compliance becoming required outside of the DoD? The answer is yes. The GSA has already included the requirement for level 1 in their GSA STARS contract. And I have heard that there are groups being set up right now in the government to understand how it might apply to DHS, NASA, and the other agencies.
Yeah, and actually I'd like to add on to that too real quickly. CMMC and NIST, this global standard, it's evolving, and the suggestion that you're making, Jill, is very, very correct. We're starting to see things from the automotive industry as well, where they're beginning to look at standards that they want to adopt. And it seems likely this is going to build on the NIST framework.
So another question is, can the same firm provide CMMC consulting and also provide certification services? The answer is yes. However, there has to be independence, meaning that if you have, I think in this case, the answer is no, because I think he's talking about, like, if it's a company, you can't have CyberNINES come in and do your assessment and give you, you know, consulting services, let's say on NIST 800-171, and then also then once the requirement comes in to do a third-party assessment through CMMC, we can't come in and do that assessment for you. We can't do both for the same company. Anything else? Yeah, and so there, you know, back to that point, you do have to be very careful about that conflict of interest. So is there funding available from SBA or other areas?
Can I take this one, Scott?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so right now there is not much out there specifically for this, but there is a grant request that was submitted through the Wisconsin Procurement Institute that is in the process of going through to be authorized, and when that happens, that grant money will then have to be funded. It's probably going to take about 12 months, but there are things in the pipes to begin to support small to medium businesses in this process. I was actually a part of the panel that set across like roughly how much they thought this would cost businesses on average, and what that money would be best spent for. So as they drafted the idea of this grant, it was an interesting process, and I was happy to be a part of it. But right now there's not a ton, and there is some coming forward.
And Katie Arrington, who is the CISO for DoD acquisition, had made some comments initially that the DoD was going to provide some support for organizations, but they've walked that back. And so at this point, from, you know, big DoD, I don't see anything down the road. But keep in mind that doing these things is the right thing to do to protect your company. It's critical that you know, if you don't want to get hit even by ransomware attacks, you want to be following this framework and doing it. Anything else?
And you can also always send your questions to the email address that will be shown on the last slide.
So I don't see anything else coming in at this point. I appreciate everybody's attendance. I think Rosa is going to put up a kind of a polling to give us some feedback. So why don't you go ahead and do that, Rosa? So if you could help us by filling out the survey, we would appreciate it. And you can find the survey, or you can, sorry, the survey, you can find the presentation. We'll have that online, and appreciate everybody's attendance. And we look forward to helping your companies in any way that we can.
The recording of this webinar will be available on our website at cybernines.com. I think that's the next slide. And then you will also receive a follow-up email from us tomorrow. Let's wait 2 more minutes for the polling to end.
So while there's a few people still on, we're also going to be doing the Cybersecurity Summit out of the Twin Cities is going to be having a small business track. And we are going to be presenting more information at that summit also. And there'll be a number of different cyber related presentations that are going to be focused on the small business. So I encourage you to take a look at that, and we'll have a link to that Cybersecurity Summit in October on our website too.